You're on.
Good morning, and welcome to Speaking Free with Christopher Long and Robert Budd, the co-leaders of Family Residences and Essential Enterprises, Inc., a not-for-profit here on Long Island, which you will be hearing about in a few moments. But this show is an opportunity for us to highlight and initiate a discussion about topics that are meaningful to our listeners here on Long Island. We plan to have featured guests, highlight events relevant to our topics of discussion, and to build linkages for people here on Long Island to help them access information, services, and supports on a wide range of diverse topics. And I am Christopher Long, the proud co-leader of Family Residences, and I'm joined here by my colleague, Robert Budd.
Good morning. So Family Residences and Essential Enterprises was founded 40 years ago, and we are thrilled to be sharing our anniversary year in this manner. We were asked to do this show because of our diversity, our spirit of collaboration, innovation, and this morning we will be celebrating that in a very real way with a topic that is so near and dear to our hearts. And we have a very wonderful family philosophy that says each of us realizes our full potential when we celebrate our gifts, our talents, and our passions with others. Today, this is so true because Christopher Long is very passionate about the foster care system and the celebration of youth services.
So today's topic will be about adoption, and this is a topic that's near and dear to me both professionally and personally, as I am the proud father of 5 boys that I adopted out of the foster care system. And today's discussion is specifically around the theme of adoption because each year November is recognized as National Adoption Awareness Month. And while all adoption-related issues are critically important, the particular focus of this month is the adoption of children in foster care. It is an initiative of the Children's Bureau with a goal of increasing national awareness and bringing attention to the need to find permanent families for children and youth in the United States foster care system. And before I introduce our panel, because we have an esteemed group with us today to discuss this topic, I just want to share with you some interesting facts that many people are probably not aware of. But children in the foster care system move on an average of 7 times during their time in care. And speaking personally about my own children, my oldest son had bounced from over 20 different homes. 75.3 million Americans have considered adoption. And if just 1 in 700 of these adults adopted, every child in foster care would have a permanent family. Pretty amazing statistic that we were able to access from the David Thomas Foundation for Adoption. 61% of children in foster care enter the system due to neglect, and more than 20,000 of those young people across the United States age out with no permanent resource. So it really is an extraordinary and compelling discussion, and I am so proud to introduce our panel. If I may begin by introducing Pat O'Brien, the Long Island Rockland County Director of Adoption and Guardianship and the Adoptive Foster Care Families Coalition of New York. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Melanie, a young lady that is in the foster care system now, who's going to speak about her own journey.
Hi.
And Anita Dowd-Neufeld, who's the Chief Administrative Officer of FREE and also a mother of 2 adopted children as well, who's going to speak about international and domestic adoption later on in the show.
Good morning.
Okay, so thank you for being here. So Pat, you have over 30 years of experience in this field. So why don't you tell us a little bit about your experience and why you're here today?
All right. Well, the main reason why I'm here today is I'm the director of a brand new post-adoption program called AGAPE, which is the Adoption Guardianship Assistance Program for Everyone. It's a program that was recently created with OCFS because usually funding is not available to families after they adopt children when developmentally as they go through life can benefit from having extra services after the adoption finalization. And National Adoption Month is a month that celebrates the finalizations of adoption.
Sure.
And we just like for folks to know that there's also services available out here on Long Island even after adoption occurs and after guardianship occurs.
What types of services? Can you speak to our listeners and share just some of the services that are available to families? families?
Well, I mean, with the Agape program, it's a family that just calls us, and then we figure it out from there. So it could be case management for a while. It could be referral. It could be joining a support group. It could be joining a self-care group. It could be a variety of things that's fit to meet the needs of the family. So we don't have a specific program. We just want to do this for that. Have an adoptive family call us, and then we brainstorm with them on how we can serve them best.
What types of services do the children typically require after they transition to an adoptive home?
I don't know if it's typical, but in regard to the calls, very often they can benefit from some counseling and from some mental health services. But that's only a small percentage of adoptive children that might need that service, but it's probably a significant percentage of the families that are calling us because they're experiencing difficulties in that particular time period in their life development together, you know. So
Do you find that most children have difficulty with the transition?
not really the transition. Most children have difficulty with loss and trauma from their past histories. I mean, the transition can trigger one of those traumas for sure, like a transition such as an adoption finalization. But generally, it's not really about the transition. It's about dealing with historical losses and historical traumas.
I assume that you have relationships with organizations that provide counseling services that are essentially experts in working with kids that have experienced trauma.
Yes, and of course, we're trying to develop those relationships out here on Long Island because we want to find the best trauma-informed therapists that are willing to, to accept the insurances that people have. So on a case-by-case basis, we're always figuring out what's best for a particular family.
Can you tell us a little bit about the process of adoption? I think a lot of people are uninformed of how to go about adopting a child that is in care.
Well, as you know, there are many children in care who are older kids, and they absolutely need parents before they age out of the foster care system. I just want to personally commend you because it's the first time I'm meeting you, but I've heard about you for many years, Dr. Long, who adopted a number of children who I think were teenagers, or some of them were teenagers when they moved in with you. That is so crucial, and the best thing for people to do is to learn about this first. Go to an organization, whether it's Department of Social Service or a private agency, take a 10-week learning experience. See if this is something that you might consider doing. And then from that process, those organizations help you get through the nitty-gritty paperwork part. But I always advocate, educate yourself first. Learn what you need to learn, particularly about kids' trauma, kids' losses, how that affects their daily lives, and really make an absolute commitment to the children, because it's the bottom line is the commitment of parents that will get the kids to where they need to be throughout life.
Now, you were the founder of an organization, an extraordinary organization that provides direct outreach to teenagers in care, correct?
Yes, that is correct.
You want to tell us a little bit about You Gotta Believe?
Well, the organization You Gotta Believe, the Older Child Adoption and Permanency Movement, and even though I don't actually I'm not the executive director I'm not their executive director. You never stop being a founder, So
Exactly.
And we have an excellent program out here in Nassau and Suffolk County, and all people need to do if they have any interest in adopting older kids is to give us a call, And what they would do first is enroll you in a learning experience. They would have you sign up for a 10-week, essentially adoption course about what to expect when older kids need a permanent family.
And this is perfectly aligned with the 2017 National Adoption Month initiative. Interestingly enough, this year's theme is specifically teens need families no matter what.
No matter what. I did not know that.
Yes, so this is perfect opportunity for us. Yes,
yeah.
so and it highlights the importance of identifying well-prepared and committed families
Yeah.
for the thousands of children that are in care. What makes the experience of adopting teens different?
Well, actually, on some levels, if you find this hard to believe, but it's true, it's even easier than adopting a younger child, and sometimes even adopting a baby. depending on what crisis the babies might have gone through during the pregnancy period. Kids come with opinions. Kids come with knowing how to do things. Kids come with diapers that don't need to be changed. Kids come with a lot of basic knowledge. And you just and why we spend time doing parenting classes before they come, because there are ways to deal with teenagers that if you can be calm and cool in the moment, they're very logical people to deal with if they're not in the middle of an emotional crisis. What we want to do is help kids get through whatever crisis in that moment, and then you come back to it later. And you really can't do that with an out-of-control 3-year-old or an out-of-control 5-year-old, but you absolutely can do it with a 16 or 17 or 18-year-old that might be experiencing emotional issues in a particular moment.
I could not agree with you more. That I have 4 of my 5 are teenagers, so it's been an interesting journey, but nonetheless, I couldn't agree with you more. But it's interesting that many of these young people, and I think much of this has to do with the fear that people have about adopting a child that has been essentially raised in care. If they're 16 or 17 years old or are seeking a family, I think people are very ambivalent, and the statistics show that they are less likely to be adopted as they get older.
I'm sure that statistic is true, but most people probably don't come to an agency that says, "Hey, learn about this."
Exactly.
And take some time. And in fact, it wasn't a coincidence that the reason why we named the organization "You Gotta Believe" is because you really have to believe that kids are absolutely adoptable. And the best way to do that is to take a learning experience and find out for yourself.
Exactly, and that's exactly why we're doing this show. We really want people to know that this is a great opportunity to build your family. So what happens to these young people that transition out of foster care that don't have a stable support system or permanent resource?
The single greatest form of preventable homelessness is kids aging out of foster care. There is no reason why any one of those children should be homeless. And the system plays a big game with kids, because they say we don't discharge kids to homelessness, but you discharge kids to a place where you know they're not going to stay for longer. Whether you just plop them in a relative's house without doing really supportive stuff before that, or you find a particular living circumstance, and then you don't teach them how to pay bills, and before you know it, they're being evicted. So in essence, if you don't get kids a family before they age out of the foster care system, you're really setting them up for possibly a lifelong journey of homelessness. And that's what we always wanted. That's the single thing we wanted to prevent more than anything else, is kids being homeless when they could perfectly be involved in families. I mean, there's not one kid being discharged from the system without a family that couldn't have a family.
Exactly. Can you tell me a little bit about how important it is that we develop relationships with the school districts who are serving these children academically?
Well, I mean, one of the major importances in regard to finding families for kids is there is no teenager alive in foster care to this day that don't have people that really care about them. Very often, we've actually recruit school aides, teachers, crossing guards, all sorts of folks that already are in relationship with them, asking them to take a 10-week learning experience about this kid that you care about so much, and to see if this is something that you can do because you already know and really have a relationship and often love this kid. You know, I worked as a recruiter for 2.5 years with the Wendy's Wonderful Kids program.
Sure.
And they gave me a caseload of teenagers on the verge of aging out of foster care, and there wasn't one kid who didn't have somebody in their life who could be brought forward if there was somebody who could teach them how to work the system to be that kid's lifetime parent.
And so many people are just uninformed of the process, right?
That's right.
So that's essentially what we wanted to do today, was help people better understand that this is really possible. If you go through the proper training, there are many resources available to you to kind of help you with that transition.
That's right.
And so that you're not experiencing the burden of the paperwork. And I think people get intimidated by that process, but there's many supports available.
Yeah, and the nice thing about doing the educational experience, those folks will help you walk through all the other things you have to do. You know, I mean, because basically it's not that complicated if you got somebody who's helping you out. Because they need financial information, they need doctors' reports, they need references, we need to know that they're financially stable, where they can pay their own bills, because the system really offers assistance. If you can meet your own needs, that we can help you meet the young person's needs financially and all. So there's a lot to be learned, and it's really not as complicated as it seems if you're not just approaching a system and having all this stuff thrown at you, like in a folder or in a half hour discussion. Like very often you get into when you call somebody and say, I want to be a foster parent or an adoptive parent.
How common is kinship adoption? You had spoken a little bit about families living with relatives or other biological resources. Is it common?
Well, I would say probably the single greatest reason why there has been a reduction in the foster care system over the last 20 years is because we finally got clued into the fact that just because your birth mom or your birth dad might not be capable of caring for you at this moment in time, that there could be many people in your own family that can. So kinship adoption and kinship guardianship is definitely something that's being considered a lot more than it was even 15, 20 years ago, and I really think that's a good thing.
And all of the post-adoption services are available to
Well,
those
that's right.
families as
That's
well,
right. Anybody who legally adopts or legally does guardianship can get services through our program. That's for sure.
That's terrific.
Can I
Thank
give
you
a phone
so
number
much,
in
Pat.
case anybody was
Sure,
interested?
please give us
all
the
I
phone
got,
number.
all I got to do is give us a call at 631-598-1983, and you just say that you heard this radio program. Ask for Pat O'Brien, and if I'm not there taking the call, I call you back in a very short period of time.
Thank you so much. We really appreciate you being here today. Transitioning over to Melanie. Hi, Melanie.
Hi,
How are you today?
I'm good.
We really thank you for being here and for sharing your story. You want to tell our listeners a little bit about yourself?
Well, I'm 16 and I currently live in the Mercy First Syosset campus, which is a foster care agency. Yeah,
How long have you been in care?
I've been in care for, I'd say, a little bit over 6 months.
Mm-hmm. You want to tell us a little bit about the experience?
Well, it's had its ups and downs. Like, I've been in Manhattan, I've been in Brooklyn, and now I'm in Long Island. And so a lot of what you guys were saying is very true. How there are actually a lot of kids that I know who are in foster care, who are going through like their permanency plans, like the kinship guardians, and yeah.
So there's a lot. So you've met a lot of friends along your journey, right?
Yes, a lot of people.
That's great. Is there something you think we can be doing differently to help young people?
I just feel like it needs to be more public and more vocalized about how adoption, how transition works, because a lot of teenagers in foster care, they're not open to adoption, or they're worried that because they cannot live with their biological parents, they feel like that automatically cuts them off from the rest of their family. And
It's beautifully said. So you think young people also need more information about what
Yeah.
options exist for them,
yeah.
right? So what are you hoping for yourself, Melanie?
My permanency goal is actually a kinship guardian. I'm hoping to move to Florida with one of my biological uncles and his family, hopefully by January.
Terrific. And Mercy First, and you have a lot of resources available to you that'll help you with that transition.
Yes, what a lot of people don't know is that the foster care system will help you as long as you know how to work it. And how-
That's true.
because they actually like they help you with so much. They help you financially. They provide therapy. They provide so much that you'll need when you come out of foster care. And yeah.
Do you have any words of advice for children in care?
I guess the only like words I could really say to them is that things can get better and things will get better if you also put in the work.
Very well said. Thank you, Melanie. I'm sure we're going to have some more questions for you, but I just wanted to transition to Robert for a moment because Melanie brought up a great point about people just aren't aware and it needs to be more public, and Free has launched an initiative that will hopefully help that.
Well, Melanie, you're so beautifully spoken. Thank you. You used the term bouncing around. And I have to say, as someone who often, I'm kind of our designated driver when Chris and I go places. And so for those on the radio, you couldn't see us laughing on that. But there's a term that often is used, and that is the bounce. And you just so beautifully described that, how many places you've been in such a short period of time. And so Chris highlighted the experience of his journey and his family and created a movement. And the kickoff for the movement was this beautiful, beautiful book called Stop the Bounce. And the book has these beautiful stories, these amazingly inspiring photographs, and it is about his journey and the ability for us all to participate in stopping the bounce. The other point that was so beautifully made, and Pat, thank you, you're so passionate and it's so clear that your life's work is truly making such a huge difference in so many people's lives. But getting information out and dispelling the myth, there's just so much misinformation. And personally, before I met Chris and just listening to the phone calls, and we often joke around, I would be like banging my head into the window as I was driving along sometimes, because he would be getting these phone calls. We have some place for this kid to go on Thursday, another place on Saturday. Can you do either Friday or Sunday? It's just amazing. I don't think people really understand how impressive that bounce can be. So Stop the Bounce also, in addition to educating, is supporting unfunded services. So every dime that's raised through Stop the Bounce is not only raising awareness, but going to unfunded services. Chris, perhaps you can share a little bit more about what inspired you.
Sure. Well, my journey began with my having worked in the health and human services field for so long and engaging potential families that were interested in building a family. And I was exploring every option that exists. And I thought there were just so many people that needed a home, so many young people that needed a home right here in my own backyard, and that I really needed to begin to explore it. And at first, I didn't know exactly what direction to go. And I never thought that I would have 5 boys, quite frankly. I thought maybe 1, possibly 2. And somehow, the joke in my family is that some people collect stamps. Chris collects children. So that is been my, just kind of expanded because there were so many kids and we were unable to find my boys' permanent resources, and therefore we opened our home to them, and they are all thankfully thriving today. But one of the things that I've learned is that partnering with the local school district, I have a wonderful relationship with the local school district, and it's critically important to utilize every resource available to you. The resources that Pat described earlier and the many resources available in our own backyards. But there are many people, including myself, that are out there that are willing to help families figure this journey out and to answer any questions that may be available. But the Stop the Bounce book, you can access more information at www.familyres.org, and you can support our initiative by purchasing the book, because all of the proceeds, as Robert mentioned, support unfunded youth services here on Long Island and beyond. Thank you, Robert. And now transitioning from foster care, we have Anita Dowd Neufeld here to speak a little bit about her own journey through the domestic and international adoption process. Thank you for being here, Anita.
Thank you, Chris. Yeah, my story is a little bit different. I adopted two boys, one from directly from Mexico, Guadalajara, and the other one through an agency on the Texas border, Adoption Service Associates, which unfortunately is now no longer in business. So it was a decision that we had to make, as to how we wanted to adopt, and it's something that we had talked about for many years. We have adopted children, internationally adopted children on both sides of our family. And we decided that originally we wanted to go through the country of Chile. So we did a home study and we were ready to go. We were on a waiting list for a year. And at that point, the government in Chile changed and the adoption stopped. So after waiting a year on a waiting list, we no longer had a baby available. So then we looked at some domestic adoptions. We met with a few attorneys. We went to Little Flower because Little Flower was the agency that did our home study. We actually met with some birth parents. And, those situations didn't work out either. They decided, the birth parents that we met with decided to keep the baby after we were interviewed and stuff. So being very disappointed, we started to get involved with the Adoptive Parents Committee on Long Island. And we started to reach out to other families that had adopted through different sources, both domestic and international. And then they had told us about an attorney in Mexico who had children waiting to be adopted. So we already had our home study done. It was already translated into Spanish. And within 4 months, we adopted our first son, Patrick, from Guadalajara, Mexico. And that was an experience. We had to travel down there. We were down there for 6 weeks.
And how old was he when you adopted?
He was 10 days old. And that's only because it took us a while to get down there. We didn't think he was going to be ready so quickly. And we had to pack up the dog and we had to get somebody to watch the house. And we went down there. We traveled down there. We stayed in Guadalajara for a couple of weeks and made sure he was physically okay. He saw doctors, he got his shots. We traveled to Mexico City, where we finalized the adoption, and then we flew over to La Ciudad Juarez, where we got the visa to bring him back into the country. So that was Patrick. And then we decided, okay, after 2 years, let's adopt another child. And we wanted another Hispanic child because neither my husband or I were definitely or are of Hispanic origins. So we went to a agency in Texas that we knew had other Mexican kids available for adoption. So we went on the waiting list there, and within 2 months, again, it was a quick surprise that our son Shane was born. And we went down there, and we picked him up. He was 24 hours old.
Wow.
And we met the birth parents, which was a totally different experience than the first time. We met his older sister at that point. And we actually took him back, and I have an interesting story, which I told my older son I would tell. This is his claim to fame, Patrick's claim to fame. When we flew back, we flew out of Dallas Airport. So my husband's online. He's checking in and making sure all the flights were okay. And I had Shane in a little harness in front of me, a little papoose. And Patrick starts running through the airport like a bat out of hell as fast as he can. He's 2 years old. And all of a sudden, this large man, big tall man in a suit starts running after him because it's very hectic in the airport. And he picks him up and he says, "I think you lost somebody," and he hands him to me. And I said, "Thank you." I go to turn around, and then I see a swarm of people around this man. And I turn around, and all I hear is, Evander. It was Evander Holyfield who picked him up and handed him back to me. So that's my son Patrick's claim to fame. Evander Holyfield picked me up when I was 2 years old and brought me back to mom. So.
And what services and resources were available to you at the time? Post-adoption services were or were
there
not
were
available?
not with the Mexican adoption, no. Actually, what we did with Patrick when he was adopted was we continued involvement with the Adoptive Parents Committee, the Long Island Association. We actually went on the board. We did a lot of fundraising and stuff for them. Certainly with Shane, you had to fly back to Texas 6 months later and finalize the adoption back there. So he was kind of in a semi-foster care situation. Then we finalized the adoption 6 months later back in San Antonio.
Well, we want to thank our panel for being a part of this day. And what's important is that many children are coming from unstable or neglectful situations. They have a lot of hope, and so do we. So we thank you all for being here, and there are many resources available. You can access at www.familyres.org. And if you want to just repeat your number again, Pat, family?
631-598-1983, and we serve all adoptive families, not just families from foster care, international adoption, private adoption, and every family.
Melanie, best of luck to you in the future.
Thank you.
Thank you
Thanks
for
for
being here.
sharing your inspirational story.
Thank you all.
Thank you.